Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Although, well, for me, it's evening. For you guys, might be morning or afternoon or the middle of the night if you are a villainous down in Australia. So thanks all for joining me. We're going to talk about Catholicism today. We're going to look at papal doctrines. We're going to look at papal statements, encyclicals. We'll look at Catholic Church beliefs. And of course, we will be looking at the SSPX, but I want to lay some foundations. This should be useful, and I do regularly come across Catholics who don't seem to know their own catechism or the structure of the church. So, of course, that I think this might be helpful for those to learn something about how their church is structured, what it believes, and also, of course, I do come across Protestants who quite bluntly just misrepresent or blatantly lie about Catholic doctrines, Catholic beliefs, Catholic structure, and history. So let's hope we can do something to educate the miseducated on that score. So yeah, welcome everyone. Hello, Hope in Christ, and Mike and Philip and Catherine. Please do let me know about that research you mentioned. So yeah, thanks all. And of course, I want to finish the Born Again series of that. I have one more set of slides. I think I have 30 pages left to do. What is interesting is that I do notice that the work that I'm doing lately, YouTube gives my channel a hard time. It's genuinely suppresses the channel because my statistics make no sense. That said, I am noticing, and I could be wrong, but I do feel I am noticing that there is a great deal of, from the Protestant side of the fence, there's a lot of sudden defense of the exact issues that I've been raising. There's a great deal of attempts to establish some kind of historical lineage for Protestantism, and I just get the feeling this is in a reaction to things I've been saying, and I see it from big names, I see it from all over. So there seems to be a shift in the polemic, and yeah. And of course, I also do notice that people don't mention my name when they do make content that relates to me. And yeah, that's just how it is. But also, when I do engage with Protestants, very rarely do they actually want to engage with me. It's like Muslims who will not engage with you when you seem to know Islam too well. Same thing. Protestants won't engage with my commentary because they seem to think that I might know too much about the actual history. And yeah. Besides the fact that last week we had an interesting video with Mal, we discussed, of course, Adam Seeker and Usama as well, and we were discussing Reasoned Answers and Mary and their commentary on Mal and Jay. And of course, as unexpected, Thaddeus did misrepresent my material on Luther and Calvin, but that's par for the course. So moving on. Let me see, when you're born into a nation that's predominantly Catholic and you've identified as Catholic, it creates that problem. You don't have to bother looking into it. Well, yeah, there's that is true. But yeah, I've always loved history. So I'm actually busy writing a historical tour of Warsaw's Old Town. It's my 4th historical tour. And I'm writing a short book on Copernicus and the Protestants. And that's something I've covered briefly on the channel. I'm halfway done. The publisher is very happy with the first 4 chapters. It's a short book. I might make a small compendium on other topics. And he said, no, the first 4 chapters are excellent. So we're going ahead. So I will continue. Catherine says that was an excellent stream. Thank you. Yeah, I think it went very well. Mike says, yeah, the same problem with the Orthodox. When I start exposing their flaws, they stop responding. Yeah, at some point I will deal with the Orthodox. There's just so much for me to get through. I have so many topics I want to cover, completed presentations that I haven't yet managed to deliver, which I spent a lot of time writing recently. But yes, I do understand. And when I do get to Eastern Orthodoxy, I can assure you that the Eastern Orthodox are not going to like what I have to say. Yeah, not going to like it. Just like Protestants don't like what I have to say about Protestantism. So where were we? Right, let's jump into this one up. Let's just pick up where we left off. I'm going to try this new layout again. I've only used it once before. So let's jump into the content. So we finished our last talk on this slide. This is Pope Pius XII. Now, I could find no evidence for this quote. If anyone has an original source for the quote, it could well be a paraphrase or just fabricated. This does happen. Please let me know. And he says, I have the conviction that the Church of Peter must assume her past or she will dig her own grave. Interesting quote. There's certain implications there, but let's have a look at things we can actually verify. Well known are the terms of Vatican Council's solemn definition, relying on the open testimony of the Scriptures. Now, I do see lots of attempts I do see lots of attempts by Protestants to claim that the Catholic Church doesn't teach the Bible, doesn't ever speak about the Bible, doesn't want to know about the Bible. Of course, from the Protestant side of the fence, the claim had to be we are biblical because they couldn't prove any kind of historical or apostolic lineage. So the Catholic Church, of course, gave the world the Bible, which is fascinating. But yeah, moving on. So they speak, all of the faithful must believe that the Holy Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff hold primacy over the whole world. And this is a message you actually see reflected in the early church fathers from the 1st to the 4th centuries. And the Roman Pontiff himself is the successor of the Blessed Peter and continues to be the true vicar of Christ and the head of the whole church, the father and teacher of all Christians, and to him is the Blessed Peter, our Lord Jesus Christ, committed the full power of caring for, ruling, and governing the universal church. Right? That's Ad Apostolorum Principis, Pope Pius XII, 1958, with the link. Hello, Justified Janice. Good to see you. Catherine says, even though you're not given proper respect and attribution, your material is changing how people understand the manipulated historical record. Well, thank you. If you can tell me a little bit more, that'll be great to know, because I genuinely see, and I have people telling me that Catholic YouTube channels where I am radioactive do use my arguments. They'll say, you put out a video on these or videos on these topics recently, and suddenly these Catholic channels are, having discussions on X, Y, and Z topics that only you've covered. Or I see there's apologetics coming out from Protestant side, and they are arguing against points that I made, not that someone else made, because I'm the only one to maybe have made those points recently. And they clearly are responding to me, but not naming me on both sides. They won't. So for whatever reasons that may be, but at least so I'm told by others, and this is the kind of, from my own investigations, feeling that I'm starting to get. It's an intuition, but I'll trust my intuition in this case, at least to some degree. It's more in Protestant channels. All right. Thank you. So the statement from the Protestants is not true. The Catholic Church teaches catechism and holds masses every day explaining the Bible. Yeah. No, there is a lot of misrepresentation. I will agree with you there, Mike. Right. So popes are the head of the church. Christ is the invisible head of the church, while the Pope, as the successor of St. Peter, is the visible head of the church, militant on earth. They are one head, as the church has taught from the beginning. The Bishop of Rome, that is the Pope, is the visible head of the church. He is the successor of St. Peter, whom Christ made chief of the apostles and the visible head of the church. The church has one ruler and one governor, the invisible one, Christ, and the visible one, the Pope. Now, of course, recently I saw in a Twitter thread, X, someone was saying, well, you see, Jesus is blah, blah, everything Jesus, as if to imply, obviously, to make the claim that Jesus doesn't work through humans, because obviously when it comes to the Reformation, it was Martin Luther and Calvin were instruments of Jesus, doing Jesus's will, guided by Jesus's own hands. But of course, when it comes to anything prior, like how the Bible got to us, yeah, that's a mystery. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. It was God did it. And then when someone said to you, saying that the Bible literally interprets itself, they were saying, yes, it does. I had a Bible lying next to me, and I said, hey, do you interpret yourself? It didn't talk to me. So my Bible must be not functioning. Who knows? But if someone can send me one of those self-interpreting Bibles, maybe an all-singing, all-dancing copy, please do. I'd love to see it interpret itself. So let's go on. Now, the visible head, the Pope, is necessary to establish and preserve the unity of the Church as taught by the Fathers. Of course, without an adjudicator, without a judge, imagine every American comes along and says, you know what? I don't need the Supreme Court. I don't need judges because I have the Constitution, and I am blessed and indwelt by the spirit of the Constitution, and therefore I don't need no judges. I don't need no man, because you see, I can read the Constitution myself, and I can make my own laws and do my own interpretation, because the spirit of the ancient church, the ancient founding fathers of America live within me, and they speak through me. And you're going to find a lot of self-serving laws where theft becomes legal because hey, this helps them to benefit themselves a whole lot. So you have to have an adjudicator to break deadlocks. And of course, no one's broken the deadlock between the Anabaptists and the Lutherans, or Luther and Calvin, or Calvin and Arminius. Never going to happen, because they all are indwelt by the Spirit. The Holy Spirit led them into all contradiction and all confusion, and they all follow the Bible alone. But they can't agree. Of course, Protestants routinely tell me that there's no such thing as a contradiction in the Protestant church. We're actually all very identical. Okay, whatever. Right, moving on. So the Pope, as the Vicar of Christ, is the perpetual, visible source and foundation of the unity of the Church, with full, supreme, immediate, and universal power over the Church. The Church and his Vicar, the Pope, are one only head of the Church, as taught by Pope Boniface VIII and his successors. Now, claims to the contrary do not depict the Catholic Church's teaching. To say otherwise is anathema. I can't remember exactly what the source was I got this, but I think I went through either a papal document or the Catechism, and this is what the Catholic Church teaches. Right, let's go to Vatican I. Everyone moans about Vatican II because I believe to become a Catholic, you have to make up 4 or 5 written conspiracy theories about the Pope, preferably at least 2 about Pope Francis. Then you have to write a thesis on how the Catholic Church murdered 50 million people, except the last guy just did that. You're going to have to up the number to maybe 53 million just to be cool, because you have to be original. And then, of course, you have to, do something like that. Then you become Catholic. But let's talk about Vatican I, because everyone hates Vatican II, right? Vatican I, Profession of Faith, 6th of January, 1870, right? And there are lots of decrees on the First Vatican Council, which are papal encyclicals. I get this from papal encyclicals online. They speak here in the Vatican I on the permanence of the primacy of Blessed Peter in the Roman pontiffs. Therefore, if anyone says that it is not by the institution of Christ, the Lord himself, that is to say, by divine law, that Blessed Peter should have perpetual successors in the primacy over the whole church, or that the Roman pontiff is not the successor of Blessed Peter in this primacy, let him be anathema. Right, so Catholics who have an issue with the Pope, the Pope is the one who makes the decision, and that's Vatican I. If the Pope makes a decision that you don't like, let's say Vatican II, then, well, yeah, the Pope's in charge, so live with that. So, requires assent of will versus assent of faith. No new dogmas or anathemas. Yeah, there's that. Yeah, there is that. Yes, Catherine, we don't need no stinking badges. This is also true. Divine Mercy Apologetics does say typical confusion by Protestants. Inerrancy versus infallibility. Fallibility versus infallibility is only enacted by an agent. The Bible is not an agent. And that is true. But Protestantism, as I've covered a few times before, treats the Bible as a magic book, as a fetish, as a pagan type talisman, as a magical object. It doesn't treat it as not. If we go to the history of Luther and you look at the history of the Teutonic Knights, you look at the influences upon Luther, the mystical influences upon Luther, then this would make sense. The whole militant pagan Germanic ethos that permeated from 12, 13, 1400s Germany, and of course that still persisted to some degree within Germany, and therefore, within Germans, and so yeah, you start to understand where that comes from. Okay, so chapter 3 on the power and character of the primacy of the Roman pontiff, and so supported by the clear witness of Holy Scripture and the manifest and explicit decrees of our predecessors of the Roman pontiffs and the councils, we promulgate anew the definition of the Ecumenical Council of Florence, which must be believed by all faithful Christians, namely that the Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff hold a worldwide primacy, and the Roman Pontiff is the successor of Blessed Peter. So nothing new there. I should let you know, though, that if you read the Lutheran confessions, like you read the Book of Concord, you go through that in detail, they do say that the Lutheran Apostolic Church is the supreme church, and that anyone that doesn't believe it is anathema, and they've actually got anathemas in there, oddly enough, and they say things very, very similar to what the Catholics say, but of course they will slander and smear the Catholics for saying it, but then they say the same things, oddly enough. And of course, you'll have people saying, I don't follow Luther, I follow Jesus or something. But if you read the Book of Concord, the doctrines of Luther, the beliefs of Luther are promulgated within this. and they become officially binding that all Lutheran Christians, all confessing Lutherans, have to believe, because Martin Luther was 100% right. Nowhere within the confessions does it state that Luther made a mistake, Luther was wrong, there's a limited application. They say, no, Luther was 100% speaking for Jesus. So, yeah. So, loads of confusion going on there. Right. All this is to be found in the Acts of the Ecumenical Councils and the Sacred Canons. We teach and declare that by divine ordinance, the Roman Church possesses a preeminence of ordinary power over every other church. This is, again, a message that you see reflected all the way from the early church fathers in the 1st and early 2nd century, from Irenaeus all the way through to the 4th century Augustine. So this does not change, right? So let me see. So for those who disagree with the power and the primacy, if you don't like Vatican II, well, Vatican I says it as well. Obey the Pope. All right. They literally follow traditions of man. Yes, men called Luther and Calvin, of course, while they attempt to level their accusations against us. That is certainly 100% true. Now, the first dogmatic constitution on the church, that is Vatican I, the dogmatic constitution, Pastor Eternus on the Church of Christ. See, now you want to go to chapters 2 to 3 and chapter 4. Chapter 1 is on the institution of the apostolic primacy in Blessed Peter, the permanence of the primacy of Blessed Peter in the Roman pontiffs, on the power and character of the primacy of the Roman pontiff, and the infallible teaching of the Roman pontiff. The Roman Pope is the true vicar of Christ, the head of the whole church, and the father and teacher of all Christians. And to him was committed, and so on and so on and so on, the full power of tending, ruling, and governing the whole church. For the Holy Spirit was promised to the successors of Peter, so that they, not so that they might, by his revelation, make known some new doctrine, but by his assistance, they might religiously guard and faithfully expound the revelation or deposit of faith transmitted by the apostles. This was embraced by all the venerable fathers and reverenced and followed by all the holy Orthodox. Any error, in accordance with the divine promise of our Lord and Savior to the Prince of his disciples. I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. That's Luke 22:32. Those are Jesus' words to Peter just before Peter denies knowing him. Now, of course, if a human failing, if the fallibility of a human invalidates doctrine, then Peter should be invalidated for, not acknowledging Jesus. Then anything Peter says after that is sinful and he needs to be thrown out of the apostles. And if none of the apostles were perfect, then they do not qualify. But of course, this doesn't apply to Protestants, you see, because the church can be in error, the Catholic Church can be in error, the Pope can be in error, councils can be in error, they can misrepresent or misread or misunderstand the Bible. But the individual Protestant is totally infallible, completely inerrant, because he's guarded by the Holy Spirit and he can't make a mistake because they can't agree on anything, but they are inerrant. The Pope, no, but them, yes. Because anything they say about the Bible is 100% true because their friends all disagree with them and all the other Protestants disagree, and none of them have been able to agree for 500 years, but they're 100% right and everyone else is wrong. And that makes no sense at all, but that's Protestantism. Porfirio says, it's funny to hear Protestants say that they refuse to have a pope bind their consciences, but they take no issue listening, accepting a pastor's or theologian's interpretation. Yeah, but then they can also just jump onto their own. All right. Right, Etsi Multa on Vatican I schismatics, right? So we're going to Vatican I, which says a lot of the same things the Church says today, because it's from the Catholic Church. Furthermore, in this one Church of Christ, no man can be or remain who does not accept, recognize, and obey the authority and supremacy of Peter and his legitimate successors. Now, why do I bring this up? Because lots of people, Catholics, complain about Vatican II, and which says a lot of the same things. And of course, if you don't like Vatican II, then will you accept Vatican I? Because I've also had lots of Catholics argue with me about the primacy of the Pope and the authority of the Pope, and because they kind of like, we follow Jesus, and the Pope can make mistakes, and I follow Jesus. And I'm like, are you sure you're Catholic? So, anywho, but Vatican I, which everyone apparently is just fine with, because it's not Vatican II, says these very same things. The Pope is in charge. Mortalium Animos, encyclical of Pope Pius XI, 6th of January 1928. And Pope Pius XI says, but to prove that they are Catholics, the neo-schismatics appeal to what they call a declaration of faith, published by them on February 6, 1870. Now, it's interesting that just as with Vatican II, we had SSPX running for the hills, claiming that the church has now descended into ultimate irredeemable corruption and blah, blah, blah. And Satan has taken over the church, and the Pope is now Beelzebub or whatever it was. And the SSPX has now rescued the church, just like Martin Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, and all the other guys before them. The very same thing happened at Vatican I. You had the old Catholics. They were schismatics because the Catholic Church had just descended into irredeemable heresy, because the Pope had turned into Beelzebub, and they were going to rescue the church, just like the SSPX, except 1870, because they promulgated a new council with Vatican I, which they didn't like. So it looks like somebody always doesn't like something. Just seems to all go in circles. So, however, right, so they have a declaration of faith published on February 6, 1870, which they insist disagrees in no regard with the Catholic faith. However, it has never been possible to prove oneself a Catholic by affirming these statements of the faith, which one accepts, and keeping silence on those doctrines which one decides not to profess. But without exception, all doctrines which the Church proposes must be accepted, as the history of the Church at all times bears witness. Oh boy, so for those Catholics who don't like Vatican II and feel themselves, no, I'm not bound by that, by anything the Church says, Vatican I, says yes. Unfortunately, it is the other way. Okay. See, et simulta, 1873, parallels with the schismatic old Catholics, the 70 Sedevacantists, and the Great Apostasy guys. Actually, let me see if there's anything interesting here. This is et simulta on the Church in Italy, Germany, and Switzerland, Pope Pius IX, 1873. Right? So there's a lot to be said here. The Swiss have always been a problem. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, loads to be said here. But of all of these Sedevacantists and all these, the same problems were there before. Nothing has changed. It's all the same. Incredibly, the old Catholics boldly affirm that the Roman pontiffs and all the bishops, the priests, and the people conjoined with him in the unity of faith and communion fell into heresy when they approved and professed the definitions of the First Vatican Council. Isn't that interesting? So Vatican I. So for those of you who grew up under Vatican I and thought, yeah, this is normal Catholicism, goes back to 9000 BC. Well, according to these guys, no, this is heresy, because the church actually goes back to 10,000 BC, and the church just made a change, a heretical change called Vatican I, which is absolutely satanic, and we cannot abide by this, and we're going to take our ball and we're going to go play in another park. And the same thing happened in Vatican II. So it all just goes around in circles. So Philip says there's only been one declared infallible declaration by Pope since Vatican I, Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Thank you very much. That's good to know. So let me see. Yeah, what a mess. Yeah, I know. It's crazy, right? Yeah, so this is just Vatican I, Vatican II. What's the difference? You know, people are finding something to moan about. That's just how it is. Therefore, they deny also the indefectibility of the church and blasphemously declare that it has perished throughout the world. Oh, man. The church has perished throughout the world, and that its visible head and the bishops have erred. They assert the necessity of restoring a legitimate episcopacy. Yeah, the church has gone into heresy. The great apostasy has happened, and we need to this sounds a lot like Vatican II, and people moaning about that. And they want to restore legitimate episcopacy in the person of their pseudo-bishop. Maybe his name was Lefebvre, who knows? Maybe it was Lefebvre's younger, better-looking brother, I don't know, who was entered not by the gate, but from elsewhere, like a thief or robber, and caused the damnation of Christ upon his head. But it's okay when you do it in Vatican II in the 60s. They were just right. Okay. Yeah, so is it true the old Catholics went out during the period Father Calvin Robinson, Anglican? I'm not sure what Calvin Robinson, he's a little all over the place. I mean, the Anglican Church is not exactly, shall we say, organized right now. Who knows, villainous? That's a good point. Yeah, there's certainly some sort of similarities there. Sorry, thank you, Catherine. Okay, so yeah, let's move on. Etsi multa on Vatican schismatics, government support for heretics. Nor is this the limit of the injuries which are committed against the Church. In addition, the Prussian and other governments of the German Empire openly support those recent heretics who call themselves Old Catholics. Their abuse of such a name would be plainly ridiculous if it were not for the fact that so many monstrous errors of this sect against the principal teachings of the Catholic faith, so many sacrileges in divine service, in the administration of the sacraments, so that so many grave scandals, so much ruin of the souls redeemed by the blood of Christ, did not force tears from our eyes. Further heresies, number 22. And surely what these sons of perdition intend is quite clear from the other writings, especially that impious and most imprudent one, which has only recently been published by the person whom they recently constituted as pseudo-bishop. Maybe it's pseudo-Lefebvre, maybe that's his name. For these writings attack and pervert the true power of the jurisdiction of the Roman pontiff and the bishops, who are the successors of Blessed Peter and the apostles. And now here's the interesting part. They transfer the power to the people, or as they say, to the community. Commune. Man, there's a word on the tip of my tongue. Power to the people. They're protesting the Pope, and they want to hand the power to the commune. Does it sound a little bit familiar? Anyone getting any sort of power to the people? You know, everything belongs to the people. There's no one in charge. It's all little socialist, let's just say, just a little bit. Pseudo Bishop 24. No? But even as the rudiments of Catholic faith declare, no one can be considered a bishop who is not linked in communion of faith and love with Peter, upon whom is built the Church of Christ, who does not adhere to the supreme pastor. To him the sheep of Christ are committed to be pastured, and who is not bound to the confirmer of fraternity which is in the world. So yeah, the question, ask yourself, these pseudo-Catholics, are they Protestants or are they communists? Who knows? It's one of those questions. Now, and they say here, this same sea for the churches spread throughout the whole world is the head, as it were, of their members, from which if one cuts himself off, he becomes an exile from the Christian religion, and as soon as he begins not to belong to its structure. So this is the apostolic lineage. If you go back to the very early days of the Christian church, you had to have apostolic lineage, the laying on of hands, the direct succession. Ask any Protestant. And this is something they could not do for 200 years, from the 16th to the 18th centuries. I've documented this well in 4 episodes on the channel. This is very, very well historically documented. Protestants cannot prove apostolic lineage. Absolutely, positively cannot. So ask them, where was your church before Luther? Ask for the apostolic lineage. Where was your church before Luther? Give me a historical lineage. Simple. You're going to get the runaround, you won't get answers. Therefore, the holy martyr Cyprian, writing about schism, denied to the pseudo-bishop Novatian even the title of Christian, on the grounds that he was cut off and separated from the Church of Christ. Now, notice, though, the Catholic Church has tried to be very ecumenical, maybe too much so, but they've tried to be inclusive of others who try to find common ground and say, look, yes, you know, we grant you certain things in common that make us both Christians, but you don't have the fullness. You don't have the fullness of faith. You don't have the fullness of lineage. We'd like to reach out. And of course, this ecumenical idea can be taken too far, but also has been abused. So then, subsequently to the teaching of God and the conjoined unity of the Catholic Church, he attempts to build a human church named after a human called Luther or Calvin. Ask yourself, therefore, he who does not retain the unity of spirit nor communion of peace and thus separates himself from the bond of the church and the college of priesthood cannot have the power nor the honor of a bishop, because he kept the unity or the peace of the episcopacy. If anyone wants to come up, I know Porfirio, you said you wanted to come up at one point. I've dropped the link in the chat if you'd like to come up. If anyone else wants to pop on, you guys are welcome. So let me have a sip of my tea. So Vatican I goes on. Therefore, by the authority of Almighty God, we excommunicate and hold as anathema Joseph Hubert himself and all those who attempted to choose him and who aided in his sacrilegious consecration. We additionally excommunicate whoever was adhered to them and belonging to their party has furnished help, favor, aid, or consent. For those who are calling themselves Catholics, who decry Vatican II and support Bishop Lefebvre, notice this is not the first time this has happened. 160 years ago, this happened in the Catholic Church, and they excommunicated the people involved as well as those who aided and abetted them. So understand, this is not a surprise. This has happened before, and perhaps you want to take a lesson from history, or you can continue to live in your errors. We declare, proclaim, and command that they are separated from the communion of the Church. They are to be considered among those with whom all faithful Christians are forbidden by the apostle to associate and have social exchange to such an extent. Hold on, let me actually redo this one because I see it's I need to change the colors here. Let me actually just fix this, okay? Because I see my color scheme is not the best. Now let me just change the color of the text. There we go. Give me one moment. So they are to be considered among those with whom all faithful Christians are forbidden by the apostle to associate and have social exchange to such an extent that, as he plainly states, they may not even be greeted. So that is the position of the church. James?
God bless you. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So what they do, there's a gentleman, I believe his name is Philip in the comments.
Yeah.
He made reference to Nostra. They juxtapose Nostra, the fourth paragraph, against Cantante Domino from the Council of Florence. In the Council of Florence, it cites the formal rejection of those who formally reject the gospel, including those of the Jewish background. And then in the Latin, it utilizes the term reprobati. So they think they have a case because the Latin of Nostra utilizes the word reprobati, and it states that they are not rejected fully because God's promises are not revoked. They don't understand that Nostra is talking about parousia, which is the second coming, right?
Right.
And the apostle even talks in Romans 11:25-29 about the fullness of the Gentiles that is to come. In that moment, they will spark jealousy in the Jews, and they shall return to the Messiah.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off the topic in the sense that I'd like to kind of stick more or less to the notes that I have generally, because I mean, I don't have these notes in front of me. I haven't prepared anything, so it's so it's not something I can verify or
Right.
comment on because it's completely over my head, right?
Okay. Well, yeah. No, I agree with how perfectly on point you are, though, with everything you said. There is really no difference between Luther's movement and Lefebvre's movement. Same thing.
Yeah. And in fact, the similarities are insane back in the 1800s. And then also, Villainous mentioned the old Eastern Orthodox. Welcome, Porfirio. There's also the old Eastern Orthodox. When they had their change, I think in the 1870s, they split off as well. They actually have a church up north in Poland, which I visited. Beautiful little shrine. I mean, lovely. And they had exactly the same problem. They had their Vatican I moment or Vatican II moment, and they split off, and that particular sect has effectively just withered away and died. There's very few of them left. Welcome, Porfirio.
Hello, how are you, Lloyd?
Good, thank you. Yeah, what thoughts do you have?
No, just wanted to say first and foremost, thank you again for having me on. Overall, with your presentation of the Society of St. Pius X, I mean, you're not the only person on this platform covering this. It's a very tricky and sensitive topic considering a lot of the issues that's been going on in the church throughout the past several decades. So on one hand, you can have some level of sympathy towards the Society of St. Pius X in terms of what they're trying to do, but at the same time, you cannot justify or make excuses of the actions of Archbishop Lefebvre. Because you have to understand that the actions of Lefebvre, while he may have had some good intentions, you can make that argument, nevertheless, he disobeyed the lawful and legitimate commands of the man who he believed was the vicar of Christ. And according to Catholic teaching, especially Vatican I, you are not allowed to disobey the lawful and legitimate authority of the man whom you believe is the Pope. The only way around for Archbishop Lefebvre to have some kind of justification for what he did is if he were to embrace sedevacantism, but he didn't. He did had some back and forths of the sedevacantist position, but he never accepted it. And even people who embrace the sedevacantist position even acknowledge that while they do not acknowledge the post-Vatican II claimants of the papacy to be valid popes, nevertheless, they do recognize that they believe that they say that Lefebvre recognized John Paul II as the vicar of Christ, and what he did, according to the 1983 Code of Canon Law, was an act of schism.
You know, I have in the past gone into depth on the actual written statement.
Audio is so off.
Oh, sorry. Now what happened there? Testing. Anyone hear me?
Your audio is good for me, man. So I don't know.
Okay, yeah, it should be good here. It's
There
looking
you go. There you go. It works
so,
now.
Yeah, look, on that point, hold that for a moment. James, I'd like to get your comment on that in a second, but I'm going to be covering some of the letters, the exchanges, the encyclicals, the writings of the popes and Lefebvre, and the things they said, because Lefebvre was also, shall we say, duplicitous, as far as I can tell. He would say one thing and mean another. He would say one thing diplomatically, but then say something else privately to his group. So he would say, yes, I support the Pope, and then secretly try and stab him in the back. So there are these things that I will be going through as well in the future. James, your thoughts?
I mean, Lefebvre's complaints were those that were perhaps, according to him, claims of syncretism, right? His complaint was syncretism, and he made a lot of claims that are actually foreign to church history, in my opinion. I'm not going to speak ill of him because he's passed away. But it's obviously clearly massive error that he was under. Not just because he negated the tenets or precepts, dogmatic precepts of Vatican I. Not just because he did that. But because even the likes of Pope Pius II, that's right, Pope Pius II, espoused statements that are identical to that of Vatican II. Pope Pius V, as a matter of fact, one of the popes during the Florentine Council, as well, espoused sentiments extremely akin to Vatican II.
Right. Well, the theory is that Vatican II did not bring new doctrines. It simply restated older doctrines in more clear language and wasn't supposed to bring new doctrine. So it was supposed to clarify the stance. I mean, I'm not sure how successful it necessarily was. Obviously, it's led to some, shall we say, unhappiness. But yeah, that would make sense, though, if previous popes were espousing the same ideas, because those ideas are, in theory, the official positions of the church.
Right, and not just like popes, like St. Thomas Aquinas, which you'd be hard-pressed to reject as a traditionalist. St. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, when I brought up earlier the notion of reprobation and rejection, right? What Vatican II teaches is right out of St. Thomas Aquinas and his commentary on Romans, literally right out of St. Thomas Aquinas. Like, how do you reject that?
Correct. No,
we had St. Thomas's book open at Trent on the table. Right.
Porfirio, do you have a comment to make?
Now that you brought up St. Thomas of Aquinas, it's very ironic and funny how I was just about to bring up. I was just about to bring up some of the arguments that James has brought up about St. Thomas of Aquinas, but you took some of the words out of me. I would like to add as well that if you read the citations of Vatican II, out of all the popes that have been quoted from Vatican II, the most quoted pope was actually Pius XII, and most traditionalists do not know that a lot of the ideas and thoughts that have been presented in the Second Vatican Council and the documents, many of these ideas were actually being expressed prior to the council, but also a lot of the beliefs of Pius XII. So if the traditionalists are to remain more consistent, they will have to call Pius XII at least a neo-modernist.
Fair enough. No, I have noted that. Yeah. No, keep that in mind. So there's a lot of material. I've got 123 slides. We're at slide number 31. So I guess I'll be doing several episodes on this, but I do try to be definitive, shall we say, and thorough. So yeah, let's go through Ubi Prima, Pius IX. What does he say? In his 1871 encyclical Ubi Prima, I made this one bright orange. There must be a reason why. Pius IX declared the election of schismatic bishops in Armenia to be illegitimate and schismatic. Oh, sounds very familiar. He affirmed that those who obstinately oppose the lawful prelates of the church, especially the Pope, are to be considered schismatics. My oh my, there is absolutely no precedent for what happened to Lefebvre. Isn't that strange? None whatsoever, except all of these from the previous century. So yeah, that's encyclical Ubi Prima, Rome, 11th March, 1871. You can find it on Vatican VA. In case anyone thinks I made this up, I'm going to bring up the original. There it is on the Vatican website. Encyclical Ubi Prima del Sommo Pontefice from the Pio IX. And it's in Italian for those who are interested. There's also Latin for those who can read that. So yeah. See, Quarta Supra on the Church in Armenia, Pope Pius IX, 1873. Pius IX, 1867 Constitution, Reversurus, also condemned the neo-schismatics, who objected to the doctrine of papal infallibility. And of course, this is where I'm also going to point this at Catholics who I've spoken to who have similar issues, who objected to the doctrine of papal infallibility on the grounds that that was a matter of discipline rather than doctrine. Pius rejected this evasion, stating that the Catholic Church has always regarded as schismatic those who oppose the Pope and any lawful prelates. Any questions, you guys?
Yeah, this sentiment is actually reiterated in Donum Veritatis, where I believe it was Cardinal Ratzinger. I could be wrong about that. You can check out if I'm wrong or right. Donum Veritatis. He makes it abundantly clear that what Ubi Prima says is exactly true, even if it's akin to disciplinary matters. There are 4 types of statements according to Donum Veritatis that are conscience binding. Only one of which, though, are irreformable, which is the elevation of infallible dogma, right? Otherwise, we understand the rest to be normative. Though reformable, the Church reserves the right to make reformable statements. The Church understands that certain things and certain manners have to be amended as to the social environment, not the dogmatic, but as to what it faces externally, right? And so they reserve that right. And it's actually a very smart move, and it proves the indefectibility of the Church. Because if the Church should elevate everything to extraordinary, it'll be contradictory at one point.
You just made me think of, I've been looking at some of these other churches, like the Worldwide Churches of God, right? It's a whole movement started by, there's a guy called Armstrong and whatnot. You look at their teachings, right? They started off as, no, we don't do the Trinity. No, the Trinity is just gobbledygook made up by people from the 1st century who were primitive cavemen who pretended they saw Jesus, okay? Fine and well. Then he dies, right? And then his successor takes over and says, you know what, guys, I changed my mind. We are now Trinitarians. And then he changes all these doctrines. You look at the Mormons, they changed all their doctrines. You look at even Protestant churches. even the Anglican Church was like the Quakers at one point, then it was like the Catholics, then it was somewhere in the middle, then it's been all over the road. So these churches change, but because they're not as monolithic as the Catholic Church, not as such an easy target to hit, they can get away with making it up as they go along because they don't have all eyes on them as a single target. They're just this mass of, blob worth of randomly moving parts that just doesn't get that kind of scrutiny and can get away with it because they change the ideas all the time.
Yep.
Video,
because at the end of the day, it ultimately comes down to the binding of one's conscience. Because as you mentioned, as I mentioned this prior, and I said this when I do apologetics, for every single individual Protestant, there exists an individual denomination within them. Even if you belong to a particular denomination, not every single person within that denomination is going to abide by the doctrines with regards to faith and morals that is expressed by that particular denomination. And with regards to the issue as espoused by Vatican I, and by Pius IX, it's been explicitly clear for a very long time that one of the main issues as to why Pius IX had to express both the temporal and the spiritual authority of the Vicar of Christ is mainly because people prior to him, I'm not referring to his predecessors, but people historically have always tried to worm their way around, not to obey a lot of the non-definitive teachings of the Pope. Sure, I'm not saying everything the Pope says or does is absolutely 100% of the time correct. That's not what I'm saying. But you have to understand in matters of discipline and governance of the church, not just in infallible dogmas, you have to be obedient. You're obedient to the Pope in everything except for sin and error. And so with regards to the law of emergency that Lefebvre tried to make an excuse of, that does not apply because, again, he was not consistent. If he believed that Vatican II was still somewhat a valid and ecumenical council, and he still believed that John Paul II was the valid Pope who had the authority to bind people's consciences, and the law of consecrating bishops, it was still the new law of consecrating bishops with papal approval was still binding. So we couldn't necessarily use an old law of emergency.
No, I've covered that in the past, and I will cover that in the future. Very, very explicitly, I will do that. See, I don't want to go too long because obviously I want to also go through the slides. So let's limit the commentary. Just I should note that Luther does write in matters of faith, every Christian is his own Pope and Church. I mean, this does come from Mr. Luther here in the Latin, and so that means that every individual Protestant becomes literally his own authority. He goes on. Pius VI, in an apostolic letter, condemned the civil constitution of the clergy in France, and he warned that the discipline is often closely related to doctrine. The schismatics at Vatican I, the French were also revolting back then already. The schismatics at Vatican I were opposing a doctrinal definition, even if they claimed it was only a disciplinary matter. What you were saying, Porfirio, is also about scope creep. Like if you look at Martin Luther's claim that it's all about indulgences, you'll find that if you have a problem with a financial funding irregularity for the building of, or the extension or the renovation of St. Paul's Cathedral, you don't take books from the Bible, move them to the back. You don't create a new tiering system. You don't suddenly invent new doctrines, change words in the Bible, and a whole bunch of other changes, remove sacraments, and a whole bunch of things that he did because you have an issue with a funding irregularity. Martin Luther's claims had nothing to do with funding. By the way, while I'm on that topic, let's have a look at this. In 1570, has anyone actually read the 95 Theses? If you read it, you'd swear it's a Catholic writing it, because Mr. Luther here...
That is one of the most hilarious things, because so many Protestants and evangelicals will say, I'm a follower of Martin Luther. And when you ask them, have you read the 95 Theses? The vast majority of them have not. And if they do, out of ignorance, they will actually think that it's full of idolatry and just Catholic doctrine. Yeah. Because if you read even some of them, even Luther affirms the papacy and other Catholic doctrines.
No, exactly. And then Joel says every individual could have a different position. All you have to do is ask 3 people in a Protestant church their position, and they would actually go against their own denomination. Simple thing is, whenever I ask a historical question, I'll say, look, what date did X happen? And I'll get 43 Bible verses, none of which hold that date. And then everyone gives me a random selection of verses, which cannot answer the question. James, any thoughts before I go on? Okay, so till James gets back, I can't hear. So Luther actually argued from a Protestant framework in the 95 Theses, right? He affirmed papal authority in purgatory, the sacrament of penance, and a legitimate place. He actually affirms a legitimate place for indulgences. His target was abuse and false preaching, but this wasn't widespread. Now, few people realize that Lateran V, okay, this council was actually in place while Luther was having this complaint. It finished in March 1517. He nails his thesis in October, supposedly, right? October 31st. But Lateran V had explicitly sat down to discuss the abuse of indulgences. It was a well-known problem, and they were implementing fixes. Now, Tetzel was a superstar, but Tetzel was also a rogue. This wasn't an issue that was church-wide. The church had very clear teachings. People were abusing it. So this is not the fault of the church. It's the fault of people not following instructions. This is fraud inside the company. This is not company policy. Few people realize this. So, for instance, he says that, if you read, right, you actually read this on purgatory, right? He presupposes purgatory, and he speaks about purgatory at length, right? He says, it seems as though for the souls in purgatory, fear should necessarily decrease and love increase. On indulgences, right? Those indulgences, preachers are in error when they say that a man is absolved from every penalty. As a matter of fact, the Pope remits to souls in purgatory no penalty, right? So he goes on, but I haven't read all of it. I just prepared this just in advance, actually, but so I haven't had a chance to really read it through. But let me just get James back. But
do you guys hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
I wanted to.
Yep.
I wanted to read something by Pope Stephen V. That kind of sort of justifies. Well, I might be off topic. I don't know if I'm off topic. Are you touching upon how Vatican II is in continuity to Vatican I?
I think I will, but not at the moment. Let me just finish this quickly, just as a comment. So if Luther asserts, now Luther does assert in the 95 Theses, papal jurisdiction over penalties. He binds the clergy and the laity to respect papal indulgence commissaries. He presupposes purgatory and satisfaction. Satisfaction would be there's justification. The way that this works is you have justification. In other words, you're forgiven. But let's say you damage your dad's car or something. Your dad forgives you, but he still makes you fix the bloody thing. You still have to pay the money, do the work, fix the thing. You spray painted the wall, right? You still have to, your dad forgives you, your mom forgives you, but you still got to scrape the paint off the wall. You still got to do the work. That's the satisfaction, right? And he only restricts indulgences to their proper scope. So these 95 Theses are not a Protestant repudiation of the papacy, purgatory, or indulgences, all things that Protestants reject. Martin Luther is actually arguing for these things, just saying, hey, don't abuse them. So this is like a Catholic call to curb false claims and abuses. But later on, Martin Luther obviously just goes off the rails and off the cliff. So I'll leave that there for now. But yeah, James, give us a brief commentary, then I can go back to the slides. Yeah.
No, go for it. Let's hear it.
Yeah, Catherine says the whole. Okay. So the Syllabus of Errors was an important document issued by Pope Pius IX in 1864 that condemned various modern errors related to liberalism, secularization, and the relationship between the church and the state. Now, do note the Protestants made the church a state organ. It condemned the view that the Roman pontiffs and ecumenical councils have wandered outside the limits of their powers, have usurped the rights of princes, and have even erred in defining matters of faith and morals. This affirmed the authority and infallibility of the Pope and councils, which the schismatics rejected. So, Catholics that reject the primacy and authority of the Pope, therefore you are a schismatic in the eyes of church law. So the syllabus condemned various forms of liberalism, rationalism, and moral relativism that underpin the schismatic rejection of Catholic doctrine and authority. So he condemned all of the positions of the schismatics who opposed the decrees of the First Vatican Council. And as you can see, the responses to Vatican I was the same as Vatican II. The response of the Church was identical between the two. Yeah. So, Orientalis Omnes Ecclesias, right? This is Pope Pius XII, 1945. And he says, ostensibly for the protection of the complete integrity of their right, but in reality so that the unlearned people might more easily fall off from the Catholic faith. Some crafty promoters of schism endeavored to reintroduce old customs already in part obsolete. The Roman pontiffs are duty-bound, openly denounced their clever and hidden machinations and decreed that without consulting the Apostolic See, no innovation was to be made in the rites of the liturgy, even on the grounds of restoring ceremonies thought to be more in conformity with liturgies approved by the same See. So yeah, Protestants are restoring the original Catholic Christian faith or whatever, the apostolic faith, and Lefebvre was restoring the original Mass and the original liturgy. But even according to 20 years before Lefebvre, Pope Pius XII says that is not an excuse. It doesn't fly. Your thoughts, guys, on that?
Yes, I wanted to add that the 3636 section, I wanted to add as well that one of the reasons why this was stressed, if let's go back centuries ago, post-Reformation, during the pontificate of Pius V, one of the reasons why quo primum was implemented was mainly because the Pope wanted to unify pretty much all of Europe into one singular Roman rite. Now, obviously, prior to this, there were many rites and there were many liturgical rites in the West. But after the Reformation, pretty much to put it simply for those who are not too familiar, the Pope just wanted to have any other types of liturgies or any types of ceremonies celebrated by other clerics, just in case something bad were to happen. That's not to say that the Church has anything against the other rites of the West. It's just mainly for unity and uniformity. So right here in that section where it says, without consulting the Apostolic See, no innovation was to be made in the rites of the liturgy. So even if prior to that, any bishop or priest that wanted to celebrate any pre-Tridentine rite or want to add any kind of particular innovation of the particular missal that they were using, they either had to have permission from the Holy See itself, or they were not allowed, or they were prohibited to doing so.
Yeah. Okay. Right, James, any comment?
No, I second what the gentleman said, Porfirio.
Now notice that Lefebvre says, in all these cases, we have affirmed that we consider the Novus Ordo Mass dangerous for the faith of people and priests. On what authority? And he says that on 16 February 1980. And the fact that the liturgical expression of Catholic Eucharistic teaching had been considerably weakened in the Novus Ordo. 7th April 1980. So he goes on a direct attack against the Mass. Now, if you speak to people of foreign persuasion, oddly enough, like Koreans and Japanese Catholics, they'll say that finally they could actually celebrate the Mass in a language they understood. It actually worked for them. You hear a lot about a lot of crazy Japanese Catholics. You will find out about odd European or American Catholics. Then again, 70% of European evangelicals don't believe Jesus is God, but they call themselves Christians and they follow the Bible only. Retards. So what you've got is the Catholic Church 20 years, 30 years, 150 years before Lefebvre was already denouncing the very things that Lefebvre was doing. So this is not a reaction to Lefebvre. This happened more than a century prior. The Catholic Church had already established its dogma, its doctrine, its laws, and Lefebvre was willfully going against long-established doctrine. And the same crisis exactly had happened in 1870 already and been dealt with. So this was just a repeat. And Catholics really do need to understand the history here. They have no standing. Yeah. Any thoughts before I go on?
I just want to say, before anyone thinks I'm about to espouse antiquarianism, I'm gonna take the church back 1700 years. We need to remember that the church, by classical definition, right? Liturgy by classical definition is priesthood, altar, and sacrifice. Now, we know that, for instance, Nicaea II promulgated iconography, iconodulia. This as well has to be something that is within the realm of dogmatics in the liturgy, right? We know there are liturgical processes that are primarily reverent, and then there is reverence that is, in a sense, accessorizing or secondary. Okay? If it is true, the complaint against Novus Ordo is a fair complaint. Then my question is, what do we do with the Edict of Milan, which grants money to the churches from Constantine? Prior to Constantine, I would gather that the liturgy in the Mass appeared more like Novus Ordo than it did like the Tridentine Mass. So people are under the impression that Novus Ordo is a lack of reverence. I'm wondering if they would say the same to the Ante-Nicene Fathers, because they had icons, for instance, in the catacombs. They had an altar, which was the coffin of a saint. They had the sacrifice, which is the source and the summit of the faith, the Holy Eucharist. They had a priesthood. They, by definition, fulfilled every requirement for valid liturgy, a valid missal, right? But if my question is, what then do we say to them? Those who oppose the Novus Ordo, well, do we believe prior to the Edict of Milan, which isn't one document, contrary to popular belief, it's 6 documents. It's one edict that is 6 documents. What do we say to them, the Ante-Nicene Fathers, who would have,
Right. No, there's lots of history, I think, here that would be useful to unpack. Yeah, put a pin in that. We'll definitely, maybe I could come back to that and discuss it in future. Couple of questions here. I'm going to go back straight to Lefebvre in a moment, but Villainous says, are Protestants using the Didache if they restored the original Christianity? No, because I've seen Protestants literally say, well, I think the Didache was written about 400, maybe 500 AD. Maybe it hasn't been written yet. Maybe that's just a shadow you're seeing in the past. Maybe it's reflected backwards by Bigfoot. Who knows?
I have to go, fellas. I'm sorry. God bless you.
Okay.
God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye. Yeah, the simple fact is that the Didache is explicitly Catholic, very clearly Catholic, and therefore it has to be dismissed. I think it's as simple as that. So let's talk about Lefebvre. Letter of Cardinal Sapir, 20th October 1980. Apologia pro Marcel Lefebvre, Volume 3, Chapter 40. As for the Novus Ordo Mass, despite the reservations which must be shown in its respect, I have never affirmed that it is in itself invalid or heretical. Yet on November 8, 1979, in a pamphlet called Monsignor Lefebvre's Position on the New Mass and the Pope, you state the following. It must be understood immediately that we do not hold to the absurd idea that if the new Mass is valid, we're then free to assist at it. The Church has always forbid the faithful to assist at the Masses of heretics or schismatics, even when valid. It is clear that no one can assist at sacrilegious Masses or those that endanger our faith. Now, it is easy to show that the new Mass manifests an explicable rapprochement with theology and the liturgy of the Protestant. So Lefebvre was claiming that the Catholic Church had effectively become a Protestant church, and he was now the true Catholic Church. And so further on, you add, one can fairly say without exaggerating that most of these Masses are sacrilegious acts which pervert the faith by diminishing it. Now, Lefebvre was a master of doublespeak. He would say, but I'm loyal to the church, and then he would stab the church in the back. I'm loyal to the Pope, but then he would stab the Pope in the back. This was par for the course with Lefebvre. You affirm that they cannot satisfy Sunday obligation, and you cast suspicion on all those priests and bishops who celebrate them. Such clear and pointed statements do not allow me to accept the explanation that you gave me in our conversation of 27 March, that you had failed to make yourself clear. Now, when we hear in Rome that he who was the heart and soul of the liturgical reform is a Freemason, we may think that he's not the only one. Not sure what they meant with that exactly, but yeah, the idea was that he was trying his best to instill fear and propaganda in the church. And to some degree, he was obviously very successful, but the condemnation against him is something that stood at that point for over a century. Porfirio, any comment before I go on?
My question to Lefebvre, if I was back, I was born after his death, but if he were to be alive, if I were to go back in time, I would be asking him this question: If you believe that the people that have promulgated the Novus Ordo Missae were heretics and schismatics, then why is your organization to this day, or why are you still trying to be in communion with the very people who you call heretics and schismatics?
Vic, no one ever accused these people of making sense, right? Yeah, they want credibility. I think they simply want credibility, but on their own terms. They want to, I mean, it's like a petulant child. They believe they're right, but you hold the authority, so they want to claim it from you. They want to force your will to bend to theirs. So that's simply how that was. Nicole, now hold on. He wasn't facing away from them when consecrating the host. Well, I checked very, very carefully, and the priest is not Jesus. I double-checked at the last service I went to. The priest, most 100%, was not Jesus himself. So he also faces the same way, because in a real sense, he's also a congregant. He's leading the congregation, and he's the example. But he's not Jesus. Jesus was, different rules apply to him, last I checked. I mean, look, comments like this are, it's kind of really, these kinds of arguments are kind of amateur. It doesn't take a lot to come up with a random answer to just supply any kind of response to it as well. It's because the church was given the power to bind and loose, to create things. So they were given, don't forget, Jesus said, I am the door, right? And then he gave Peter the keys. And he gave Peter the keys to bind and loose. And whatever they bound or loosed in heaven and on earth and so on, well, whatever they bind on earth will be bound in heaven and vice versa. So it's simple as that. Okay, let's continue. So let's continue. Papal permission to ordain bishops. So the Catholic Encyclopedia from 1913 says that for lawful ordination of the bishop, right, for lawful ordination, the bishop must be a Catholic in communion with the Holy See, free from censures, and must observe the laws prescribed for ordination. Lefebvre did not qualify. He cannot lawfully ordain any except his own subjects without authorization. The Catechism of the Catholic Church from 1992 says that the lawful ordination of a bishop requires a special intervention of the Bishop of Rome, because he is the supreme visible bond of the communion of the particular churches in the one church and the guarantor of their freedom. Oh, Porfirio disappeared. So based on these references, it appears that the requirement of permission from the Holy See for the lawful ordination of bishops has been a part of the canon law rather than divine law, at least since 1913, which is roughly 70 years or 60 years before Lefebvre and his issue arose. So the CCC, that's the Catechism of the Catholic Church from 92, reinforces this as a requirement for the lawful ordination of a bishop. Now, let's go to the Council of Trent. That's from 1566, and it affirms the supreme authority of the Pope as the true and lawful vicar of Christ, no different to Vatican I, who governs the universal church. And this indicates that even in the 16th century, the Pope's authority over episcopal ordinations was recognized. So Pius says that no authority whatsoever, save that which is proper to the supreme pastor, can render void the canonical appointment granted to any bishop, and no one can lawfully confer consecration unless he has received the mandate of the Apostolic See. This again is prior to Bishop Lefebvre and the schism caused by the SSPX. He then clarifies that bishops who have been neither named nor confirmed by the Apostolic See, but who, on the contrary, have been elected and consecrated in defiance of its express orders, enjoy no powers of teaching or jurisdiction. Hopefully this is very, very clear. Let me just bring up this. Pius XII. Oops. Oh, what have I just done to myself here? Accident. So this is Pius XII who makes these claims, and so this comes prior to Vatican II, which means that Lefebvre had no authority to ordain anyone, despite any claims and confusion to the contrary. He then reiterates that the Church's rights, including the right under the mandate of the Holy See to choose and consecrate bishops who will lawfully govern the Christian flock, have been trod underfoot. Now, let me just see. Give me one sec. I've got to check what's in this document. The Church's rights, including the right under the mandate of the Holy See to choose and consecrate bishops who will lawfully govern the Christian flock, have been trod underfoot to the great loss of the faithful, as if the Catholic Church were a creature of a single nation dependent on its civil authority and not a divine institution extending to all peoples. And that is 1958. Just so you know. Okay, so let me continue here. And then, Mystici Corporis Christi, bishops are subordinate to the lawful authority of the Roman pontiff and must be revered by the faithful as divinely appointed successors of the apostles. So we have very clear statements from Pope Pius XII. Bishops that are appointed without the mandate of the Apostolic See lack any legitimate jurisdiction, and their sacramental acts would be viewed as illicit, criminal, and sacrilegious by the Catholic Church. So hopefully that starts to clarify the position, because I had lots of discussions with people who came with all sorts of random claims and been listening to too many conspiracy channels, I guess, or reading from people who really don't do correct research or who have an agenda to push. But hopefully we can see that going all the way back to Trent and 100 years before Lefebvre even came on the scene, we see the Catholic Church is very clear about the authority of the Pope and the authority of these bishops, and that what he did was utterly illicit, not valid under the Church. Philip says the priest is persona Christi in the theology, faces the tabernacle out of respect. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, where am I now? Okay, so I will finish this slide because some of the slides have a lot of text, unfortunately, but that's how it is. So a Catholic who rejects papal authority and the Novus Ordo Mass and is not in communion with the faithful can be considered to have formally defected from the Catholic Church. Right now, I'm viewing here the Code of Canon Law 316, Actus Formalis Defectionis ab Ecclesia Catholica. That's from the Catholic Encyclopedia, Letter to the Bishops of the Catholic Church. It's a really long name. So yeah, we're going through the Catholic Encyclopedia and Ecclesia de Eucharista 40 or whatever. There's a whole lot of documents here I'm going to be quoting from. All right. Canon 316 of the Code of Canon Law says that a person who has publicly rejected the Catholic faith, has defected from ecclesial communion, or has been punished by an imposed or declared excommunication, cannot be received validly into public associations. The Catholic law takes this very seriously. Okay, fascinating. Yeah. Okay, then the 2006 document, Actus Formalis Defectionis ab Ecclesia Catholica, says that the formal act of defection must have more than a juridical administrative character and supposes therefore an act of apostasy, heresy, or schism. Rejecting papal authority and the Novus Ordo Mass would likely constitute heresy or schism. So for those Catholics who have issues with the Novus Ordo Mass and call it evil, according to the Catholic Church, you're a heretic or a schismatic. Deal with that. The Catholic Encyclopedia says that while domestic controversies within the Church do not necessarily constitute schism, it may happen that when the course of controversy has made clear what is involved in the new opinions advanced, the supreme authority in the Church will intervene by some decree. In that case, a crucial moment arises for the side whose tenets are now condemned. Your tenets are condemned. This suggests that if the Church has definitively ruled on the issues being rejected, then the person would be considered to have defected. So you have defected from the Church if you have an issue with the Novus Ordo Mass. The 94 letter on the reception of communion by the divorced and remarried says that those who live together as husband and wife with persons other than legitimate spouses may not receive Holy Communion. Interesting. And that pastors have a serious duty to admonish them that such a judgment of conscience openly contradicts the Church's teaching. So rejecting Church teaching on a fundamental matter like this will be considered defection. So do understand there's still rules and laws within the Church that actually lots of us are violating on a routine basis. So a Catholic who rejects papal authority, the Novus Ordo, and is not in communion with the faithful is considered to have formally defected from the Catholic Church through an act of heresy or schism. So for those Catholics who reject the Novus Ordo, you may want to consider your position because you have defected from the Catholic Church. Okay, so let me continue with... All right, so Lefebvre's response after these consecrations. So Lefebvre goes and he consecrates a number of bishops. Now, of course, I have provided copious amounts of answers in the past on the fact that eventually the bishops themselves were reinstated. Their heresy was, sorry, they were excommunicated. Their excommunications were reversed. Not for Lefebvre, though. Not for Lefebvre. His excommunication has never been reversed. So thus, we did well to resist. Yes, Lefebvre resisted. I am convinced that we are in the same circumstances today. We are performing an act which apparently, and unfortunately, the media will not assist us in the good sense. The headlines will, of course, be schism, excommunication to their heart's content, and yet we are convinced that all these accusations of which we are the object, all penalties of which we are the object, are null, absolutely null and void, and of which we will take no account. Now, Lefebvre is at this point going against statements, papal law, church law, divine law, canon law, going back all the way to Trent, going back well before that, in fact, but that's been formalized a century before this issue happened with, at least a century before this issue happened with Lefebvre. So we can tell simply by, it wasn't just Vatican II. Everyone wants to pin it on Vatican II, but you can go prior to Vatican II, where those very same ideas are already well established as Catholic law. And he's in violation of laws that go back to Vatican I and before Vatican I. So do understand lots of people are either misinformed or are misrepresenting the facts or just lying, as is pretty normal. So just as we took no account of the suspension, we don't care, and ended up by being congratulated by the church and by progressive churchmen, so likewise in several years, I do not know how many, only the good Lord knows how many years it will take for tradition to find its rights in Rome, we will be embraced by the Roman authorities who will thank us for having maintained the faith in our seminaries, in our families, in civil societies, in our countries, and in our monasteries and our religious houses for the greater glory of God and the salvation of souls. That's the Archbishop Lefebvre on the occasion of the Episcopal consecration, 30th of June, 1988 in Ammône, Switzerland. So there you go. The man was the man spoke out of both sides of his mouth. So the man claimed loyalty, but he clearly was not loyal. He knew he was being belligerent. He knew he was being an enemy to the church, violating church decrees. So on June 30th, 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre proceeded with this intention in violation of canon law, and he incurred an automatic excommunication under the law. I've covered that before and will again. The following day, Cardinal Bernardin Gantin of the Congregation of Bishops declared Lefebvre's excommunication. In a papal motu proprio on July 2, 1988, the Holy Father John Paul II confirmed Lefebvre's excommunication for schism. And I've covered this, and I will cover this. They mention schism like 22 times in like 2 pages. Okay, schism, 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 schism. It's all over the place. And for having consecrated bishops, despite having the Holy See's explicit instructions not to. Today, the SSPX includes approximately 400 priests in 27 countries, representing all 5 continents. Most estimates place the number of adherents to Archbishop Lefebvre's schism at about 1 million. It is the Church that has the authority to decide these matters. The Church has decided the question, given Catholic teaching on papal primacy. So there's this false version, and you should read the documents by the Society of St. Pius X. These guys have a completely fake version of history going on. Put out by the Society of St. Pius X, in which all papal decisions are up for review, that the excommunication was unjust, that they made it up based on Vatican II. No. These decisions are based on law that goes back well over a century, far earlier than that. But I've just read to you the very same thing happened in Vatican I, and the Church did exactly the same thing. So yeah, hopefully this has given you guys some interesting food for thought on this issue, and hopefully clarified a few of the historical points. So So Philip says Benedict XVI frequently said that holiness does not necessarily imply doctrinal perfection, while humans are flawed. And of course, except Martin Luther, he was perfect. Nestorianism is absolutely false. Erwin says definitely, and Erwin also said that I'm, there I am, not afraid. Very cautiously treading on contested ground. That's me. Okay, so let me see if there's anything else I want to add. The Apostolic Constitution. So let me see. This is 1983. So let me do this page, and okay, let me do this one. So I'll finish on this page. The Apostolic Constitution, Code of Canon Law from Pope John Paul II, 1983. Right? The Roman Pontiff, by virtue of his office, the Roman Pontiff possesses the power over the universal church, but also the primacy and ordinary power over all particular churches and groups. This primacy strengthens and protects the proper, ordinary, and immediate power which bishops possess in the particular churches entrusted to their care. In fulfilling the office of the supreme pastor of the church, the Roman Pontiff is always joined in communion with other bishops and with the universal church. He nevertheless has the right, according to the needs of the church, to determine the manner, whether personal or collegial, of exercising this office. No appeal or recourse is permitted against a sentence or decree of the Roman Pontiff. So Paul VI then says, the church is no longer trusted. We trust the first pagan prophet we see who speaks to us in some newspaper, and we run behind him and asking him if he has the formula for true life. I repeat, doubt has entered our conscience, and it entered through the windows that have been opened to the light. Science. Now, the quote has a slightly different context there, but do understand that this is quite an interesting point by Paul VI. So everyone wants to obviously listen to, so much doubt has been sown. Everyone wants to run to every pagan prophet and say, hey, please give me the truth. And of course, eventually it's like, just me and my Bible and my truth. And that's where we're at. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, Sandro. And so I think I'll call it a night here. Hopefully this has been helpful, interesting, giving you some perspective, but there's more to the issue than as met the eye. There's more that has been discussed. There's more facts at play here. And for those Catholics, especially the ones that gave me a very hard time about this, hopefully you can understand that you clearly don't understand your own church. You clearly have not read your own papal documents. You clearly are violating the decrees of the Pope. You clearly are going against the sacred laws of the Catholic Church, established hundreds of years before you were even born. So hopefully that makes my position clear, just based on the actual church documentation. This is a matter of record, not a matter of opinion. So thanks, guys. I will be on with Susama Daktok tomorrow. He was not available tonight. And on Thursday, I should be on with Mal, with Odon, with JC, and Usama to discuss, does the Quran talk about Jesus or talk about Muhammad? So hopefully we'll have all 5 of us on Thursday evening. Everyone's agreed. I just need to check with Usama that he's available for Thursday night.